Creepy Batman.
Fear. It's something we all experience at one time or another, to a greater or lesser degree. There's also different types of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of death. I even used to know someone who was terrified of vomiting. What is also amazing is how fear inspires different reactions in different people. Courage, cowardice, and humour are just three different ways in which people deal with fear. Tonight, I have two stories from opposite corners of the world. Two stories couldn't be more different, but in them, fear is the one common denominator. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Scary True Tales. Ever since I can remember, I grew up with strange occurrences happening to me. My earliest memory of this must have been when I was 3 or 4. Mine didn't happen in famous old mansions or castles, just here in Oz, in my home. I remember that I used to see people in the hallway all of the time, but my parents always brushed it off as imaginary friends. There was nothing imaginary about these people. They were as real as any person I have ever met. Just my parents could never see them. One night, when I was still very young, I was visited in a dream by my grandfather. He came and said to me that he had to go and to tell everyone he said goodbye. In the morning, I got up and told my mum matter-of-factly that Pop has died. She freaked out and walked off to get my stepfather, who demanded to know who had told me. They hadn't told anyone in the family that he had died the night before when they went to see him at the hospital. They still question how I knew, and I insist that it was him who came and said goodbye. Another strange story from 6 years before then is how I seem to have a memory of living a past life. I recounted it all to my paternal grandfather, or Dziadek, as I called him. He had fled his country of Poland during the Second World War with his family after his home was destroyed by bombs. I mentioned to him that he once promised he would always look after me and always keep me safe. I told him how I remembered being his sister and can remember walking with him and my family through fields and dirt roads and then becoming ill. I can clearly remember how everyone was walking in groups along the roadside when a sick feeling came over me, and I could remember falling asleep near my Uncle John, my pop's brother, and they both assured me I was safe. They would take care of me and it was okay to go to sleep. But I didn't wake up, and I ended up somewhere else in a bright light. Pop just looked at me, but never said a word about what I told him. From then on, he always looked out for me and made sure I was safe, and I had a better relationship with him and my uncle for it. In fact, better than I ever had with my own parents. It wasn't until my early teens that I learned he had a younger sister during the war who had become sick and went into a diabetic coma when they were walking to find a safe place to seek shelter. Both he and my Uncle John upheld their promise, my pop, right until the day he died. In 2013, he had had a stroke, and he said to me in hospital, "I let you go when you were sick. Now let me go. I want to see your granny." "Okay," I told him, and a week later he slipped into a coma, or a deep sleep as I call it. I don't know why it is that I have had so many experiences with the paranormal, but one day in 1993 my cousin and I found this Ouija board under his house. It was all wrapped up in bags underneath all my aunt's old junk. We later found out that her and my mum experimented with it when they were teenagers. My mother couldn't even look at a Ouija board. When me and my cousin brought the one up from under the house, she nearly ran out of my aunt's yard. You could see the fear in her eyes. She would never actually admit to it to herself, but looking back she always used to come out with things at the oddest of times. She would just be sitting there and say, "You should never mess with Ouija boards or ghosts." Well into my teenage years, I was still seeing spirits, and I decided that I wanted to shut myself off from it all and ignore it. It didn't work. Everything has increased as I have gotten older. I have came to realise that it's all real. It is actually happening. The paranormal is real. I've always had a feeling that we aren't alone in this universe. Even before I knew what extraterrestrials were in science fiction and pop culture, I'd look up into the night sky and wonder if I would ever get the chance to meet them. And it went beyond that. I have always felt like I'm not originally from here. I feel like I have lived on one of those distant alien planets, maybe in a past life or something. But a few years ago, that feeling of not being alone turned into knowing. It started not long after I moved back home in Ohio from living with an ex-boyfriend in Southern California. I was there with him for about a year. He had gotten me pregnant, but then stressed me into a miscarriage 3 months in. I left him and came back to grieve what would have been my first child. At the time, I was having to sleep on the sofa in the TV room since my grandmother had given away my mattress and bed springs whilst I was gone. She didn't think I was going to come back. In my state of depression, I did almost nothing for the first week or so, but lay on the sofa with my laptop on a footrest in front of me, usually just sitting there, downloading music. After about 2 weeks of me being home, that's when it started. I was laying on the sofa one night, and I had just finished what I was doing online and started my downloads back up, so I lowered the screen just enough to keep it on and downloading, but far enough down so that the light didn't bother me whilst I slept. I had just dozed off. I had been asleep for maybe 10 minutes, and I'm not one of those people who goes into a deep sleep that quickly, so I was still in a very light state of sleep. Then I heard, very loudly and very clearly, a man's voice, as if he was leaning down over my head. He said my name in a very urgent manner, as if he was trying to wake me up. "Megan!" I jumped awake and threw my laptop screen up for the light. But there was nobody there. They couldn't possibly have had the time to hide, especially as quickly as I reacted, and how huge the room is. But after my heart settled down, I just chalked it up to a dream and went back to sleep. That is, until 2 nights later. I was lying on the sofa in the same manner as I was the night of the first occurrence. Only this time, thoughts of my depression were keeping me wide awake. I was laying there for at least a couple of hours, my mind racing, and it was keeping me from sleeping. And that's when I heard the exact same male voice coming in from the front room, which connects to the TV room. There was no wall between the 2 rooms either. It said, "They don't even know we're here." I then heard a distinctly different male voice reply to the first, though I couldn't make out what it said. I bolted up to look into the room the voices were coming from, but again, I saw nothing. I was sure at this point that I was going crazy. But then nothing else happened for about a week. That is, until I was proven to not be crazy, as my cat also responded to the next experience. A little over a week after the second one, I was laying on the sofa, still using my laptop. I was browsing Facebook and replying to messages from a couple of friends when I heard a light scratching noise coming from one corner of the room, diagonal from my feet. At first I thought it was just my cat, Nala, as she was asleep in the chair in the exact same area the noise was coming from. But when I glanced over, she was laying there, still sound asleep. Then, as I looked at her, trying to figure out what was going on, she jerked her head up as if she had just been scared awake. And then, her and I both watched as a very dark shadow about the size of a 2-year-old child darted out from behind the chair she was laying in. It dashed across the floor of the 16-foot wide room and disappeared into the wall across from the chair. I jumped up to a sitting position after seeing this and looked back at Nala. Usually she is very alert to my movements and looks at me when I make sudden movements like that. She used to be an outdoor cat and thus a hunter, but this time she completely ignored me. Her eyes would not unglue themselves from the wall where the shadow disappeared, and the fur along her back stood on end and her tail was fluffed out. She was just as scared as I was. It was another 2 weeks until the next experience. I had plenty of time to do some online research into what could have possibly been going on at this point, but sadly, nothing really turned up. Nothing connected or made any sense. But then, the night of the fourth experience, I was laying there watching a movie on my laptop when I fell asleep in the middle of it. Sometime later, I was woken up from a sound sleep, though I had no idea why. I looked at my computer screen. It was 3:33 a.m. I found it a bit strange, but quickly fell back to sleep. The very next night, the same thing happened again, albeit the movie this time. I was woken up by something at exactly 3:33 a.m. The next day, my uncle brought me a new mattress and bed springs, so I was finally able to sleep in my bedroom again. Nothing happened that night. Maybe it was because of the move between rooms. But the night after that, I got woken up by the same male voice that I heard during the first experience. I couldn't make out what he was saying this time, but when it woke me up, I looked over at my clock on the dresser, and it was 3:33 a.m. again. I started to really have my suspicions about it being extraterrestrials at this point, but then nothing happened for 3 whole weeks. I thought that it was finally over, but then the biggest thing of all happened. I got woken up one night. It was exactly 3 weeks after the one before it, again by something that I wasn't aware of. This time, when I looked at the clock and saw that it was yet again 3:33 a.m, I closed my eyes and consciously counted to 10. I know I did not fall back asleep, but when I opened my eyes back up, my clock said 4:44 a.m. I had just lost an hour and 11 minutes of my life, and I still have no idea what happened during that time. Then, 3 days later, I woke up with a scar on my upper left arm that appeared out of nowhere in my sleep. I went to bed the night before with no marks on my arm, and there was no way I could have injured myself in my sleep. And even if I could have, it wouldn't have looked like the scar did. It actually looked like a scar that I had had for years, not a fresh injury, and it was perfectly round. After that, I haven't had any more experiences that I'm aware of, but that scar that I still have is a constant reminder that I have had encounters of the fourth kind, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if I am still having them and just don't realise it. You see, the thing is now that I see 3:33 all the time. One time I had to go for a CAT scan and I noticed on one of the digital readouts it said 333. I asked the lady doing the scan what it meant. She told me it was the height of the table I was on. Just last week, I was playing a computer game, and I noticed my score was 33444, and it reminded me of when I lost 1 hour and 11 minutes. Hello folks, it's Creepy here. I want to talk about a few things in tonight's episode. First up, me, myself and the paranormal is going to be in 3 parts because there's so much to get through. This first bit was just kind of to whet your appetite. The lady whose story this is has had so much stuff happen to her and stuff that's still happening to her that it's amazing. Next week we're going to hear about some of the things that have happened in her adult life, and you will really not want to miss the 3rd installment of her story, as this involves her experience with a haunted doll named Harold. Megan, who told me her story 1 hour and 11 minutes, has been telling me about how the numbers 333 just keep showing up all the time. After she finished telling me her story, I got a message from her later that night. She had just signed out of her YouTube account after watching some videos and happened to notice that the time was exactly 3:33. In fact, just the other night I had a brief conversation with Megan on Facebook, and I jokingly said that I might start seeing 3:33 showing up at my end since I'm doing the story. Bear in mind now that me and Megan live in completely different time zones. The message that Megan sent to close the conversation was sent at 3:33 AM local time. It's kind of hard to see this all as coincidence when it keeps happening so regularly. Now at the end of the show here, I'm going to leave the photo on of Megan's scar on her arm so that you can all have a look at it yourself, because it's pretty amazing. So thank you to everyone for watching this episode, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and make sure you don't miss out on what's coming next. I'm Creepy Battenberg saying good night and sweet dreams.